Hey everyone, it is 12:02 in the East, it is 9:02 in the West, and if it's Friday, March 4th, that means it's Lunch with Lincoln. Hey everyone, I am Reed Galen, co-founder of the Lincoln Project and your host for today. Well, before we get started, I want to say thanks to Jeff Timmer for taking the reins for the last couple of weeks. Certainly appreciate his help and making us all look better with his abilities, so thanks to Jeff. Today, joining me are senior advisors to the Lincoln Project, Trygve Olson and Stuart Stevens. Stu, Trig, thanks for coming.
You got it, man.
Rick
Thanks.
might be along a little later. He's feeling a little under the weather, but hope he can join us. All right. So guys, it's been, I saw something on Twitter the other day. An old friend of ours said, "I wish we were living in precedented times," and so we just can't seem to find a way out here. 2 years ago, we started. We had a pandemic descend on us. We had a 2020 election. 2021 was more COVID, more anti-democracy. And now we hit 2022, Omicron disappears, and Vladimir Putin appears on the Ukrainian frontier. It's a lot to take in day in and day out, but let's focus on what we're seeing here. And Trygve, why don't you take us through a little bit of, just give everybody listening and watching an update on how you think things are going over in Ukraine, and then Stuart, I want to get your sense of things as well.
I was thinking as you said that about we live in unprecedented times, I feel a little bit like Billy Joel, right? We didn't start the fire, it's always been burned.
1990, terrible song, but yes, totally.
Right at the end of the Cold War, we're back. So, in terms of how things are going in Ukraine, there's a massive information war going on between the Ukrainians and the Russians, in addition to the actual fighting that's occurring. And that information war in many ways is important, or perhaps more important than the strategic military side of this in some ways. They're equal, certainly. We're all seeing the humanitarian crisis. And I can tell you, as somebody who's talked to friends in Kiev on pretty much a nightly basis, it's a sad what's happening is tragic. There also is the dynamic that as we watch this, we've become accustomed over the last 30 years to feeling like we have to do something. And what we're seeing here is a classic set of Hobson's choices, where, any choice that gets made comes with substantial risk. Whether we get involved, don't get involved. NATO has made it pretty clear we're not going to get involved. There isn't an obligation under Article 5 to get involved. That said, obviously there's substantial military assets that are going to the Ukrainians. The Javelin missiles are demonstrating themselves to be highly effective. I saw somewhere online, 92% of them have been hitting targets. So it's an incredibly dangerous situation. It's a dangerous situation on the ground in Ukraine. It's a dangerous situation because there's the potential for unintended things to happen, like we saw last night with the nuclear power plant. There's the potential for escalation, either on Putin's side or through the desire to do something, and the drum beats that starts. Ultimately, though, I think, we don't know what will end up happening in Ukraine. What is clear is that there's going to be this is a fight that's been going on. I spent 20 years, the exact same forces in places like Ukraine. It wasn't a war at that point, but.
So, Stu, a lot. The three of us certainly lived through the Cold War, different eras of it, and came to it in different times. But a lot of Americans don't remember it. We have an increasingly young population. but now this seems. I was doing an interview yesterday where I asked the pretty well-known author who will be on the podcast when it drops next week. And Frederick has joined us. Hi, Rick.
Hey guys, sorry I'm running late.
That after 2 years of COVID, we're still split down the middle on vaccinations, not vaccinations. It's real. It's not masks, no masks. But when we've seen the heroism of not only President Zelensky, but also individual Ukrainians standing up to the Red Army, there's like 80% of Americans are now, waking up to this pro-democracy thing. Why is it that something that's at home that's killed 1 million Americans is so divisive, but something 6,000 miles from our doorstep has really invigorated or maybe, awakened the latent American bald eagle?
Well, I think part of the answer is it didn't have to be this way about COVID. Had there been a completely different response from the very beginning, had it not been politicized, had it been treated as a disease and not a focus point, a focus group political point, that didn't have to happen. But look, I don't think this is really complicated. It's who's not going to be for the side, the side that wants to be for David is a lot bigger than the side that wants to be for Goliath.
Right.
And obviously Zelensky is playing a role here. I think that was the phrase that Charles Krauthammer used, that we took a holiday from history. Mm-hmm. There was a sense that Russia was not evil. And the Republican Party has been complicit in normalizing Putin. I mean, all of this talk, all of these years, all these decades, Republican Party said that we were against totalitarianism, that we were against evil, tear down this wall. And then you have a candidate who runs for nomination of the Republican Party who is openly pro-Putin, who literally backs Putin's talking points, and Republicans are like, that's great. I'm good with that. That's not a problem. So that is, I don't think that we have seen, when you combine that with the completely unprecedented effort on Russian intelligence to impact the 2016 election for Trump, I don't see how you can't look at what's happened to the Republican Party as the most successful combination of infiltration and compromising of a modern political party in, certainly post-war, World War II Democratic history.
So, Rick, I want to say one thing before I ask the question. Remember a couple of year and a half ago now, remember we wrote that op-ed right before right before the November 2020 election. We said, if he loses, he's not going to go quietly. And what side of the river are you going to stand on? Mm-hmm. And all of our former friends and colleagues, for the most part, they either rushed across the river or they took a slow boat, but one way or the other, they crossed over, and now they're sort of looking back at us. But I want to talk about the media aspect of this in the Republican Party,
Sure.
Which is, you had Tucker Carlson being vehemently, vociferously pro-Putin. Now he's all twisted in knots. He's clearly backtracking. He's saying now that as Russian propaganda, organs are being taken offline, that's somehow silencing American voices. Last night, Senator Lindsey Graham says that somebody should put a bullet in Putin on Twitter, says that publicly, and then Laura Ingraham and Tom Cotton talk about what a moron he is for saying this. So what, as a resident anthropologist of the worst people on the earth, or at least the worst people in America, I should say, what's going on with them? Because they sure seem out of sorts.
Well, they're in a real weird bind right now, because there is on the right a sort of affinity for Vladimir Putin for a bunch of reasons. Mm-hmm. One is he was a guy who could get away with being the white nationalist and not have anybody check him. Mm-hmm. And there's a little jealousy in there. There's a little bit of envy in there. There's a little bit of desire to have that kind of position and power among a lot of people on the right. Tucker's a perfect example. There is, though, a broader affiliation and affinity for Putin, because what does the Republican Party stand for now? It doesn't stand for free markets or individual liberty or the Constitution. It stands for the retention and acquisition of power and the exercise of pure political power. It's why you see these Republican state legislatures just steamrolling on all this anti-voting legislation, on all these abortion bans and all these other things, and all these speech restrictions, because they believe in the pure raw exercise of power. So there is a part of them that's like, yeah, what he's doing is what we like. They enjoy that. They have an affinity for it. There are also some overtly pro-Russian voices in the GOP that are very, very influential. Tucker is one. Bannon is another. And it iterates down the food chain. But there were certainly a lot of people who, on the right, who were big fans of Vladimir Putin, and who were the people who were denying most vociferously the argument, because it was based in fact, that Trump tried to blackmail Ukraine into launching a phony investigation of Joe Biden. And it should go without saying, there's been a long series of quid pro quos with very wealthy and influential Russians. Moscow Mitch McConnell had an aluminum factory built in his district. Now, you don't think of Kentucky as like the center of aluminum fab in the country, but somehow or another, they built a big, aluminum factory there. I don't know if that had any influence on it, but yes. And so, we see this influence with Trump from the very beginning. For 40 years, Trump has been a Russian cheerleader. 40 years. You can go back into the dawn of Trump's earliest op-eds, which were all ghosted by Roger Stone. You can go back as far back into the 1980s, where he was saying, I'll negotiate the best deal for Russia against the U.S. for a nuclear arms reduction treaty. All these things, this long-running intertwined financial and business relationship with a lot of Russian money, which the Trumps admitted to, then, the obvious role they played in 2016. And by the way, for all the Republicans who want to retcon that and pretend it never happened, that report from the Senate Intelligence Committee was signed by people like Marco Rubio.
Mm-hmm. He was the chair.
They know that Putin tried to and did successfully influence 2016. Why was Trump begging Putin for a personal meeting in 2020? I don't know. Call me crazy. But I think if it hadn't been for COVID, they would have pulled off a summit sometime in the summer of 2020. So, that affinity for Russia, the affinity for authoritarianism, the affinity for the white Nats for Putin, and for the trad Catholics and all these who have taken hook, line, and sinker the idea that he is the savior of the Christian universe. It fits in with the DNA of the modern Republican Party.
So, Trygve, you've talked a lot about what we call cognitive dissonance, right? Mm-hmm. When suddenly two opposing ideas appear inside someone's brain who's been otherwise, tuned into Fox for the last however many years, and now this Putin stuff comes in, and while many people can hold two opposing ideas in their head, if you're that far down the rabbit hole, it starts to sort of, the reality distortion field is pierced. Right. So take us a little bit through that, because that's also what it looks like as Fox and these folks are sort of trying to figure themselves out. I think also you see that, with all these members of Republican members of Congress and the Senate on the floor of the State of the Union the other night wearing, orange and yellow, their worldview has been impeded by reality, and now they seem a little bit upset about where to go next. So that's one part. And then second, take us through sort of, as we talk about this vertical structure, it seems like a lot of people are trying to figure out what side of this line they're supposed to be on. But the line is really a snake, and it's trying to bite them as they dance around.
Yeah, I mean, the cognitive dissonance we're all old enough to have remembered the Cold War. Certainly Republicans who remember the Cold War remember and realize that Russians have been doing this kind of thing for a long time, that, Reagan called them an evil empire for a reason, right? Mm-hmm. So for them, sitting watching Tucker Carlson each night, asking, why shouldn't I take Russia's side? And then you start seeing the kind of barbarism that you're seeing from Ukraine, just literally focused on terrorizing. There's a cognitive dissonance there, because the reality is they're looking at it, they're feeling distress about it, and they're at the same time saying this doesn't conform with what I believe. Trump calling Putin a genius. I talk about it all the time, probably on these things, but my 86-year-old mother called me just off the rails. And she's been backing Trump all along, saying, a genius? Like, what is he thinks Putin's a genius? He's not a genius. They've been doing this stuff forever. There's a lot of that going on, which is why they don't know how to respond. It's why the synchronization of their messaging is a mess. And I will tell you, when you have autocratic forces, whether it's Putin or Lukashenko or the guys I went up with against Milosevic, helped people with, when you have your foot on their throat and their enablers, you don't let up when they start saying, changing their tune, trying to compromise. There's zero sum. They're only compromising because you got your foot on their throat. You press down. And right now is the time to not be attacking to be attacking them. There's plenty of time to relitigate people who are appeasing them. But for the ones that have been focused solely on defending Putin, on defending Trump, the ones who enabled Trump to call into question Article 5, the people who, the Kevin McCarthy's who knew better and still went about the way that they did, we have to press down on them and finish them. And we have to divide them from the ones who simply appease, because we can have fights with them. We can litigate that after the fact. But right now, that central core of Trumpism, Putinism, and that's really, it's all the same, right? Autocracy and authoritarianism. Mm-hmm. We have to press down on them. And that's what we have to do with Putin too. Now, does that mean, in Putin's case, should it be militarily? Probably not. Should we be saying, Lindsey Graham said what a lot of people are hoping for. That's counterproductive because it makes Putin more dangerous, not less. But should we be empowering? And are those Russians that are on the streets protesting risking now 15 years in jail simply for saying no war in Ukraine? Yeah, we should be doing everything we can because they're our allies too.
So Stuart, I want to think about what Trygve just said about those images we've seen of the old woman who survived a 900-day siege of Stalingrad, or excuse me, at the time Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, and was just recently arrested on the streets for protesting, asking for peace. We've seen, old men, old women, young women in Ukraine, images, of them strapping on AK-47s or sitting in bombed out buildings, smiling and telling jokes as they are making Molotov cocktails. You compare that with the cosplay that we see with Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Three Names, strapping 9mm to their hips. Do you think that bleeds through to those Republicans that Trygve's talking about, like his mom?
No, I'm pretty pessimistic about how this is going to impact the Republican Party negatively. I think that their ability to deny reality is an essential element of being a Republican now, which is an essential element of being in a totalitarian state. Mm. And it's COVID kills people, you deny COVID kills people. Right. Vaccines help. It's all just an alternative reality. It's backed up by this vast propaganda machine. So you have Mitch McConnell going out and saying they wouldn't have done this if we hadn't withdrawn from Afghanistan in the way we did, which is at face value the most absurd thing. When they went into Crimea, we were in Afghanistan. There's no logic to that. It's just about political points. Right. And look, the reality is when Mitt Romney went out and said, Russia was our major international foe, geopolitical foe, and he used the word foe carefully versus threat.
Or enemy.
He was criticized wrongly by the Obama campaign, and a lot of media. Not a lot of Republicans spoke out publicly because we were all kind of going to wear the same team. But behind the scenes, there were a lot of Republicans who did disagree with Romney, who thought that China or Iraq should be. I mean, I was there. I heard these when these calls came in. And I think the breeding ground for what Trump was able to do, come out embracing Putin, is all part of this world that these Republicans want. There are no gay people in Russia. There are no women in power in Russia. There is a strong man in Russia. There is this worship of this central power of the state. And that's really what, as Republican Party has become an autocratic movement. So in many ways, this is very logical. Russia is an autocratic state. Why not like Putin? So now that, like, Trygve says, it's sort of kind of dissonance. Okay, it's not good that people that I say that I'm for are like blowing up children. Like, I want to be there. Like, who was there in the Russian command center that said, "Hey guys, let's blow up a nuclear reactor"? I mean, how do you say, let's shoot a nuclear reactor? Like, I mean, how long does it take to say, okay, like, maybe I don't know. Are we kind of close?
Right. Right. Yeah. Like, these guys are like meters away, right? Like, they're not 45 miles or 100 miles. They're right next door to the goddamn thing.
Yeah, and the prevailing winds blow toward the northeast. This can't work out well for Russia.
I mean,
they literally blow right. They literally blow right at Moscow.
Right.
Yeah. Not even kidding.
We shouldn't do this.
But you know what it is? You know what it is, guys? Part of it is, and Stuart, you hit on something critically important. It's the autocratic state, and whether it's Russia or the vertical that is the Republican Party. So it's about power for the sake of power. And why do a bunch of guys start shooting at the nuclear power plant? Because they've been told to, and they're conditioned to follow orders for the same reason that 178 or whatever it was members of Congress voted to overturn an election that 95% of them truly knew was free and fair. It's the same dynamic, fear.
One of the things I think that we have very hard for us to have a concept of is Ukrainian history. And what Stalin did to Ukraine. Read Anne Applebaum's beautiful book about the millions who were starved to death. What happened in Ukraine when the Germans came through. And then what happened to many of those Ukrainians when the Russians came through in places where the Germans had occupied.
Right.
And they killed a lot of these people because, they assumed that they had cooperated with the Germans. I mean, it's been the true slaughterhouse of Europe.
Right. Tim Snyder wrote a book called Bloodlands.
And these are the heirs to it. So how many, I was thinking about this, like those 13 who died on Snake Island. They said, go fuck yourself, Russian worship. How many of those had grandfathers, great-grandfathers who were partisans? Yeah, probably a lot. How many women fought in the partisan movement? It was tremendously male and female. These are people that were living in swamps. I mean, you go back and you read these first-person accounts. I mean, there's stories of Ukrainian women who are retreating into the swamps from Nazis who drown their own children because they're crying and they're giving away where they are. This is their history. And the children here in power, from Lowenbauer to Ted Cruz to Lindsey Graham, they just have no sense of this. I don't think that, I think someone is a much more serious person as Joe Biden and has a sense of this.
Well, and so, Rick, speaking of the president, we were talking about this on our call this morning.
Right. Which, by the way, folks, if we could put you on that call this morning, it was really we do a call several days a week, for LP folks. Today was one of the most fascinating calls we've done in a long time. We really dug down into like the motivations and the shape of the strategic terrain.
I know, but also the relative backfire of a javelin missile, right?
Yeah,
it's a little bit all over the place. But Rick, I want to ask you because, I mean, I said this on the call this morning. I want to get your sense. Is I believe it in my bones that when this started heating up, the Europeans were unsure of themselves.
Absolutely.
And they looked back across the Atlantic to Joe Biden.
Yep.
And Biden said, "We are here.
Remember,
I've been gone, but we are back. We are here, and we are not going anywhere." I mean,
Joe
what do you
Biden
think about that?
gave them a single line in his initial statements that I think, and I know for a fact, I've spoken to some folks in Germany in particular, when he said, "We will defend every inch of NATO territory under Article 5 of the NATO treaty." And folks, Article 5 says an attack on any member of NATO is an attack on every member of NATO. It has only been employed one time. It's in the 70 plus years of NATO's existence. And that one time was after 9/11, where Europe came to help us and fight alongside us. Now, this moment that we're in with NATO required a very careful touch that Biden, as a guy with generations of foreign policy experience, and look, I didn't always agree with Joe Biden on things in foreign policy. We had very different views about like the partitioning of Iraq, but he is a guy who understands the long arc of American leadership, particularly with NATO and Europe.
But I think also, Rick, that let me, before you go on, I think the motivation, even if you disagreed with the policy or an idea, was one well thought out and well held. It wasn't just like, here's the way that we can do best. Here's what's best for me, right? It was, okay, is there a broader opportunity to make things better for all these other people, as opposed to like, how do I get mine as quick as I can?
Right. Well, and the idea here of putting American foreign policy in a position where we are coordinating with, cooperating with, and representing the same values as Europe is something that was anathema to Trump. Remember, I'll look back on this in 1 second. The reason Putin loved Trump so much is Putin was doing the work for him of destroying NATO. More than anything else, Putin wants to crack NATO and dominate the space and to establish again the greater Rus or the Soviet Union 2.0 electric boogaloo, whatever you want to call it. He wants to crack the alliance that he views as the thing that destroyed the Soviet Union. Biden's very smart play here to let Europe take point and assure them of America's support and assistance and a strong American follow-up. It is one of the things we will look back in history as a diplomatic power move of the highest order. It really, really worked. And I think there were a lot of skeptics. And there were a lot of Republicans who were hoping it would not work.
Well, that's right. So, Trygve, let me take from Rick and Biden in the White House to Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. If you could take us inside that room, based on your experience, what do you think's going on there?
So so let me add one thing to what Rick was saying. You have to remember Donald Trump, before he was the nominee at the Republican convention, called into question Article 5, the common defense, that an attack on one is an attack on all. And Joe Biden, as Rick pointed out, saying, "We will defend every inch," was basically reclaiming what the Russians and the world knew as a certainty that Donald Trump called into question. And that is that was an alliance that would defend every inch of territory if attacked. So what's going on in the Kremlin? Putin gave a speech this morning in which he was sort of delusional for us probably watching it, but gave a speech this morning saying where, he wanted reconciliation with the West and Russia wasn't a threat to any of its neighbors. Right now, we sit there and look at that through our prism and we say to ourselves, that's crazy. He's killing Ukrainians who are his neighbors. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's how he sees it. I mean, he talks about Kiev Rusk and the dawn of the Russian people and all the rest of it. But that does also say to me, he understands that he has some real problems. And you have to always ask yourself in these cases, whether it's Donald Trump or Putin or Xi, any autocrat, you have to ask yourself, who and what do they fear? Mm-hmm. Because, you guys hear this all the time. Audience hasn't. I talk about this. Democracy is built on faith in each other at its core. Autocracy is imposed through fear of one another. So, and that's what Putin's trying to do in Ukraine. That's what Donald Trump was trying to do on 1/6. Same game. So you have to ask yourself, what is it that Putin fears? And really, there's two things Putin fears, I believe. One is the masses rising up and taking him out of power. And the other is the elites around him, palace coup. Those are the two things he fears. And so when he says what he said today, that's intended for a domestic audience. But we also have to recognize Putin's going to need an exit ramp, because there's the two ways this can go are he either gets an exit ramp and things de-escalate globally, or they continue to escalate towards Armageddon. And there has to be a realization that is what it is. People saying, oh my God, they're attacking a nuclear power plant. We must do something. Let's bomb them. You'll have a much bigger nuclear problem on your front doorstep if you escalate that. So that, and it's okay to say, I'm willing to take the risk of that and let's have a no-fly zone. But in Putin's case, this is about what can he have as can he be given an exit ramp? Can we buy time? Because he is incredibly vulnerable. And while he may not realize it, there's no way he comes out of this a winner. And in the middle to longer term, he's not gonna stay in power. At some point, this is the beginning of the end. So but I don't know that most of these guys don't realize that. So it becomes a question of, in the Kremlin, there's probably beneath him a whole lot of grumbling. You see it. Did you see the generals, the look on their faces when they were told to amp up the nuclear threat? I mean, furthermore, he's sitting 40 feet from his closest advisors. What is he afraid of? They're going to jump on him and choke him to death? Maybe, literally. So that's kind of where I think things are going. There's a really good sign that probably most people didn't see or catch in the Twitter stuff that's going on, but it was announced today that the U.S. European Command and the Russian generals have set up a hotline. When the hotline was called, the Russian generals picked up. We should all be thankful for that. That's not appeasing the Russians. That's trying to protect all of us, to have communication so there's no miscommunications. Those kinds of efforts are important as you look towards the game, because that's where change is going to come in Russia, and that's where this is going to resolve itself.
So, Stuart, as we send everybody off into the weekend, and we hope it's a safe and healthy one for everybody, do you have any green shoots for you? Anything positive you can leave folks with? Is there a democratic awakening here?
I think the positive is a reminder that evil exists. This is the face of evil,
right?
And it's not complicated. It's not shades of gray. Ukrainians are good. The Russians are evil. It's that simple. And it's important that we not get lost in that.
Actually, Stuart, though, make sure it's Putin who's evil. There's a whole lot of Russians who are.
Yeah. I tell people, you know what, Trygve, that's a great point. I tell people this all the time. I love Russia and I love Russians. They are amazing people, and what everybody hoped was going to happen after the end of the Cold War was diverted by this weird combination of hyper corruption, organized crime, and the remnants of the Soviet power structure that had to reconfigure around Putin. And I think it's just there are a lot of Russians right now. There's an 87-year-old or 94-year-old woman in St. Petersburg who was a survivor of Stalingrad protesting this war. And I think, and you're seeing tens of thousands of Russians take to the streets, and thousands are being arrested every day. The free press in Russia has been completely closed down. You know, I have no desire to see Russia reduced to rubble. I wish they were a prosperous Western style, democracy. It's a long road to get there, but Putin is the true roadblock to that, not the Russian people.
So it's the clarity, you think? There's the good guy and there's the bad guy, and they're clear.
But let me it's a longer conversation, but Russians, you have to respect Russians as fully functional people. Russians have given us Bolshevism, they have given us Stalin, they have given us the Cold War, they have given us Putin. That is their country. And if they have some responsibility, now they had massive sacrifice on a level we just have no concept of in World War II.
Sure.
20 million. But at a certain point, I think you have to say, what is it about Russia that has this inability to sustain democracy? What is it about Russia that has an ingrained desire? Is it historical longing for the czar? What is it? Because this is not a geographically cursed place. It is a place with tremendous resources. And it has failed history over and over again, and rarely has been a friend of democracy, only for a short period in World War II. And I think it's fair to ask, why is that? And who does have responsibility for it? I don't think we do. I think they do.
Yeah.
Well,
that's
on that cherry note, everybody, before we get out of here, we want to run a spot that we put up, I think, earlier in the week that Rick and Stu and the creative team put together. So, gang behind the scenes, why don't we go ahead and run that?
At long last, the glorious invasion of Ukraine begins. Soon, the motherland will take the wayward province into her firm embrace again. Field Marshal Putin offers cheers and many celebrations for American comrades who showed loyalty to Mother Russia. We have much gratitude and thanks for Fox News, most especially Comrade Tucker Carlson. For his loyalty, will receive highest Russian honor, the Order of Lenin. We thank Steve Bannon, admirer and student of Comrade Lenin, who led the Republicans to support of Comrade Putin's plans for Greater Russia. We thank GOP Comrade Senator Joshua Hawley, who blocked enemies of Russia that the warmonger Biden wished to appoint to his regime. Russia waits 40 years for American Republicans to throw away disgrace of Ronald Reagan. Republicans say they stand for America. Comrade Putin knows better.
Well, gang,
That is such a great.
things.
That's a Rick Wilson ad, and I think it's pure genius.
Right. Well, listen,
Thank you,
guys.
Stuart.
Rick, Trygve, Stuart, I want to thank you all for joining me today. Everybody out there, I want to thank you for joining us. As always, remember that you can tune in here Mondays and Fridays at noon Eastern. Please tune into the breakdown on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. We're speaking Wednesday evening. And of course, if you have not checked out the podcast hosted by yours truly, please do. Would love to have a couple of new listeners out there. And also, everybody, just remember, you can get involved here at home. Join the union.us. Go there, sign up. tell us how you want to help, where you want to help, and we'll make sure you get to the right place. Yes.
Hey,
sir.
before we hop, Reed, I wanted to say one other thing. Yesterday, folks, we put up on the Lincoln Project Gear Store a poster designed by our own Kate Salkowitz in-house. It was 100% of the net goes to supporting humanitarian relief in Ukraine. The poster is the Russian warship "Go Fuck Yourself." It's beautifully designed. We're going to do a second printing of it. And again, 100% of the proceeds go to relief for Ukraine. Sold out yesterday in a hot minute. So you might want to grab a copy of that at our gear store.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rick. Everybody, have a great weekend, and we'll see you next.
Thanks, everybody. Avoid the sea of nuclear fire.
Thanks.